Welcome back to Behind the Curtain of Healthcare. We're already on episode 5, and now we hope you have an idea of the type of content we'll be putting out. So if you'd like to keep up with what we're doing, we invite you to subscribe, and please leave a like on our videos or a review on the audio version, whichever you prefer. You can find everywhere we publish in the description or show notes. Our 5th guest was Dr. Gary Pitts, who's board certified in lifestyle medicine and has been practicing for 24 years. He made a significant shift in how he practices medicine after seeing 2 of his patients turn their health around through lifestyle changes. He discusses some simple changes everyone can make to improve their health and how making lifestyle changes should be the foundation of managing many common ailments. He also touches on where pharmaceuticals fit in and why using them to brute force results may not be the best first option depending on the situation. We hope to have Dr. Pitts back, and if you'd like to hear more from him as well, please leave a like or a few stars on your platform of choice. Thanks again for joining us. Now let's get on to the show. Tonight's guest is Dr. Gary Pitts. Gary is board certified in both family medicine and lifestyle medicine. He earned his bachelor's degree at Indiana Wesleyan University in 1982. With a degree in science education, Gary taught chemistry, physics, biology, general science, and physical science at Morristown High School until 1986. He took the MCAT in 1986 just to see how good he really was at science and scored well. While loving the teaching profession, he didn't feel it was going to be his life's calling. He had determined that his future was in the business sector and started working with a local telephone company where he participated in an intern program for grooming young people for executive level positions. Gary decided that corporate life was not his calling either, then applied and was accepted to IU School of Medicine in 1989. He completed his family medicine residency at Fort Wayne in June of 1996. He has been practicing family medicine for 24 years, predominantly in the private setting. In 2012, he became aware of the power of lifestyle to prevent, manage, and even cure chronic disease states. Since that time, he's devoted intense effort into studying, understanding, and communicating those aspects that seem to have the most power over the diseases that afflict so many in this country. So, Gary, lifestyle medicine, what exactly is that?
Actually, it's one of the newest branches of medicine. It is a board certification now, and started about 15 years ago. It's been growing by leaps and bounds, sometimes as much as 40% per year. Its basic tenets are 6. There are 6 pillars that it stands on. The first being diet, the second being physical activity, the third being stress management. Then we go to sleep, avoidance of substance abuse, and finally relationships. By trying to intervene on those 6 pillars, we manage chronic disease quite potently.
What are some of the chronic diseases that people would seek to treat through lifestyle?
Well, look at the chronic diseases that tend to affect us now. And first off, let's define chronic disease. Years ago, what killed us the most? Infections, right? And then we developed antibiotics. Infections became controllable, and then we started seeing these other diseases limit our lifespan. For instance, the number 1 killer of Americans, heart disease. Number 2 killer of Americans, the cancers. Then you look at diabetes type 2, you look at obesity, you look at hypertension, you look at all the arthritises, all of the autoimmune conditions, multiple sclerosis, even throw Alzheimer's disease in that pile. Chronic diseases. And then when you look at the costs of chronic disease, just the direct cost of it is $1.1 trillion a year. But when you look at the indirect costs, hey, how much time do I need off work? What does this do to my family and the relationships? How much money do I have to spend on all this ancillary equipment? You're looking at $3.7 trillion a year managing chronic disease.
So, Gary, let me ask if I could. You were practicing, if my math is right, a traditional family practice setting, and somewhere around year 16, if my math is right, you became aware of this other pathway that you now are certified in and integrate into your practice. What led up to it? Was it an epiphany? Was it a conversation with a friend? Was it a seminar you went to? A personal situation? Yeah, I mean, what happened that brought you down a different pathway?
2 ladies. I'm
Now, you know you're going to have to explain this, right?
Yeah.
You betcha. You ladies, I'm doing my typical thing in the office. They come in, they have a complaint. I think of which pill to put them on, which test to run, which intervention is going to be the best for them. And both of these ladies, who, by the way, didn't know each other, came in their 40s, overweight, constantly tired, aching everywhere. Their cycles were getting messed up. They didn't feel good. They never felt good. Their emotions were down. And so I did the typical workup. I checked thyroids and blood counts, and I put them on steroids and hormones and did all the things that we doctors tend to do. And they just didn't get better, which, the first thing we doctors do when you don't get better is we blame you for not getting better. And so I said, okay, what are you doing wrong here? Or are you just kind of nuts, right? But I worked with them over the course of several months and saw no benefit at all. I think they probably just got tired of dealing with me, and so they dropped out of sight for a few months. And a few months later, both of them came back.
Was your suspicion at the time that maybe they weren't following the regimen that you had prescribed for them? Were you wondering, were they not following through, if you remember back then, as to why you weren't seeing improvement, or no?
This is a common enough issue in medicine that I don't think I thought that deeply about it. I think what I thought at that time was, well, we're just not getting there and need to do the next test. But eventually they got tired of doing the next test, and so they just didn't show up for their appointments until later on that year. It was in the fall of 2011, actually, when they showed back up, both of them looking and feeling like $1 million. They had lost weight, their color was good, their energy was up, and when I asked them what they had done, who were they seeing, who figured this out, they both looked at me and just said, well, I changed my diet. I said, yeah, great. You changed your diet, but what did you really do? And they just affirmed they'd changed their diet. So because there were two of them doing this, I kind of said, okay, and these are not fringe people. These are good, solid, smart ladies who I could trust what they were saying. And so I started doing a little bit more of a dive into what kind of effect diet could have on these conditions. And I ended up reading a book by Dr. Joel Fuhrman called Eat to Live. And my initial foray into that book was disbelief. I just simply didn't believe that he was saying what he was, but I'm a bit of a study nerd. So I started looking at the studies he was quoting, and the science was good. So I started working towards teaching my patients better on what they should be doing. And I started seeing success, A1Cs coming down, blood pressures coming down, weight being lost by a significant number of patients who were following this lead. However, I was still in do as I say, not as I do mode. I hadn't changed my diet. I hadn't changed my lifestyle because, hey, I was early 50s and I'm feeling good and I got good genes. Nobody in my family has heart disease. What do I care? I can just still mow down what I want to. The fact that I was carrying 30 extra pounds, I didn't think that I was really overweight because the people around me were more overweight. So
it's all relative, right?
Yeah. So kind of like back in 1986 when I did the MCAT just to see how good I was at science. Well, I jumped in a CAT scanner in 2012 to see just how good my heart was. And guess who has calcium where it doesn't belong? You get calcium in your coronary arteries, you're on the road to heart disease. I got this letter from the institution where I got the CT done, congratulating me. I have far less calcium in my arteries than the normal 52-year-old man who has a 1 in 3 chance of a heart attack. I don't want to be anywhere near normal, thank you very much. I want to be way under. In fact, that number should be 0, and mine wasn't. So I came home and did what I should not have done. I told my wife. Yeah, she's got a significant investment in me. She just wants me around for a few more decades. So we changed our diet immediately. And
so you had her support. She was all in.
Not only her, but my daughter, who was living with us at the time, as well as her husband. The four of us really agreed to do this together. And I have to say, my wife and my daughter have done a phenomenal job of learning what it's like to cook in the way that we needed to cook. But for those first 2 weeks, we all just manfully chewed and swallowed a lot of leaves. Yeah. When you make a severe left turn into this diet, you just start with salads. and not salads with any dressing on them. You just chew and swallow a lot of leaves. But we stayed the course. We sat at those dinner tables and we chewed and swallowed leaves while my wife and my daughter figured out what else they could do. And I still remember the night when we came home. Do you guys like squash?
I'm a big
Squash
fan.
fans?
Any vegetable I eat practically.
Yeah, not me. I can't stand squash. Squash is boring. Come on, admit it.
Why do I?
Squash in your mouth. There's no
Why do I
there.
feel like I
It
got
just sits there
set?
on my tongue and says swallow because there's nothing going on here. It's boring. Okay?
You set me up with that.
You're right, I did. But doggone it, it's just a boring vegetable. So, but you know what my daughter did? She took an acorn squash, hollowed out the middle, cooked it, brought it back out of the oven, stuffed the insides with dates and mandarin oranges and cinnamon and cashews, and I wish I could remember all the things she put in there. Yeah. But when she brought that back out of the oven, it was like dessert for dinner. And my son-in-law was doing a war dance around the table. I was just dancing in my seat going, yippee, we get to actually enjoy a meal again, you know? And that was when we all recognized that this was sustainable, when we could find delicious things that we could still eat and follow a diet that made a lot more sense for us. Now, admittedly, fear is what drove me in this direction.
I was going to just ask you that question.
Yeah. Fear is a great motivator, but how often does fear last? Let's go to that subconscious, right? The first time you stick a double stuffed Oreo in your mouth and you don't keel over, your subconscious says, see, everything's fine. You're not going to die, you know? But what kept me on this track was not fear. It was how much better I felt within days of starting this diet. And I have to admit to you, my diet previously was terrible. Mm-hmm. I am an absolute sugar addict. I have no fear of caffeine and all of the diet sodas it was wrapped around. I ate nothing close to fruits and vegetables. I was meat and potatoes and whatever chemical I could shove in my mouth that tasted good.
If I could sidetrack you for 1 second, sure. Gary, and times may have changed in 8 years. I don't know from a medical perspective, but what did your peers think of you at that time? When, you know, the closest people to you, other physicians, were they receptive? Were they curious? Did they think you had kind of gone off the deep end on some kind of, rant, an eating rant? Like, how were you viewed? I'm going to assume you're probably in a kind of a traditional community, maybe a conservative community. Mm-hmm. If I'm wrong, please let me know. Mm-hmm. That's the impression I have. How did that go down with your colleagues?
Well, first off, I was independent at the time. Okay. So I was just me. A partner was coming, hadn't gotten there yet. I had 2 PAs who were working with me at the time. And both of them were very receptive to this because I basically shoved eat to live down their throats. Read this, guys. We're going to be preaching this, And so since I signed their paychecks, they had to do what I said. So they read the books. They were both on board. So it was basically the 3 of us that were then starting to preach it to the patients. By the time I had more colleagues, again, check out the snow on the roof. I was the grand old man, and these kids that were coming in to join me, they were very respectful, and when I spoke about this, they listened. And so it was interesting to see the change in the lives of my colleagues as they came on board and saw improvements in their scenarios as well. They were much younger and didn't face the possibility of chronic diseases, but one of them lost a significant amount of weight. Did I say that right? I did not. Significant amounts of weight. There we go. And so I think that made it easier for them to accept. And over the course of the next couple of years, I went from way on the fringe to the mainstream catching up to this. I'm in Indiana. We are very conservative in this state. We are, really fond of our different meats. We're not a fruit and vegetable society, and yet the information is out there for everybody now. So it was very easy to communicate this to my colleagues, and they'd already heard this from other sources as well.
So this video cast, I'm afraid, could last about 6 hours, and I have other questions I want to ask. But Jack, I've been an interviewer hog here, so I'm pinging the ball back to you.
Well, yeah, one thing I wanted to ask, because that acorn dessert sounded amazing. Did you notice that your taste buds actually changed, especially because I was never really a big sweets guy ever.
You're right.
But yeah, isn't it like you can actually taste so much more sweetness in fruits and vegetables that was never there before?
You are so correct. And this is something, and I believe it was Joel Fuhrman's book who mentioned that taste buds would change. And I read it and believed it. For everybody else, did not believe it for me. I did not. You talk to the people who knew me 7 years ago, and you'd find out all of them laughed about how picky I am. I eat nothing. It's only these few little things I would eat. And now I find that there is such a symphony of tastes out there. But really, what happens is the sugar and the salt and the fats basically hijack our taste buds. And so when all you're interested in is the sugar, the salt, and the fat, that's all you go after taste-wise. Once you get those washed off your tongue, wow, everything tastes good. So you bite into a peach, and yeah, it's sweet, but it's certainly not eaten like eating a bowl of sugar-frosted flakes.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned the reward pathways. Well, you didn't. I don't think you mentioned. Did you mention reward pathways in specific? Because
I did not.
Okay. So for those who might not know, the actual effects of sugar, salt, and so on actually affect the same reward pathways as some other very common and very hard to get off of addictive substances. Is that something that you might be able to touch on?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when you look at the behaviors that we are supposed to indulge in, we get rewarded for those behaviors, correct? And we are attracted to sugar, salt, and fat because they're not supposed to be found that much in nature. But what we can do is actually refine our foods down to sugar, salt, and fat. Why do you think you can't only eat one Lay's potato chip, right? It's sugar, salt, and fat. When we get rewarded for going down these paths, it's because we're supposed to look for that stuff in nature. Well, those same paths end up with the addictive substances as well. And we have to throw another one in here, cheese. Actually, cheese has casomorphones in it, which hit our morphine receptors. So cheese is actually mildly addictive.
Yeah, Gary depressed me the other night when we were talking. He told me about cheese, Jack. It's my downfall. So yeah, I'm like a day removed from cheese now since our conversation. So
well,
and my hands aren't shaking quite as much as they were yesterday.
Let me bolster your resolve just a little bit. Dairy in general. It's linked to prostate cancer. That's the big one. It's linked to aggressive ovarian cancer. And no, Fred, you don't have to worry about that one, regardless of what Jeff says. Increases insulin-like growth factor 1, which is actually a marker for inflammation. Inflammation is the seat of all of these diseases, okay? Increases asthma symptoms, increases blood pressure, increases acne. Again, you probably don't have to worry about that one, Jack. Decreases male fertility. How many more kids do you two want? Causes premature puberty. Well, we're past that. 5-time increase in twinning. A woman who drinks milk has 5 times the chance of twins as a woman who does not imbibe in any dairy at all. Yeah, and I have a pair of twins. Oops. May increase the bone and the hip fracture rates. That's a little controversial, but there's some studies that are showing that. And when you look at populations, the highest milk drinking countries are also the highest hip fracture countries. And so that correlation, I can't say cause and effect, but I can sure point to a link there. Let's see. 75% of the world is lactose intolerant. Does that not say something? You know what I tell my patients all the time is 100% of humans are lactose intolerant. We're not supposed to be drinking it, but 100% of us are lactose intolerant. Some of us are just less so than others. But anybody who says they're not, give them a gallon of milk, see how they feel afterwards. Increased risk of premature death. Now, there's one that we're all having to look at, even though Fred and I aren't that premature anymore, but we're just gonna skip past that part. Increased risk of heart disease, more cancer risk overall. Men, increased risk of death as well. And let's see, linked to sinus problems, allergies, eczema, ear infections, type 1 diabetes, chronic constipation, pediatric anemia, and Parkinson's disease. It's also the number one source of saturated fat, with all of the fun things that come along with saturated fat. But other than that, milk's fine.
Well, am I wrong in thinking you were kind of applying it to dairy in general, not just milk, or were you just focusing on milk there? That's dairy in general.
Several of these are milk specific.
Okay.
But I was talking about dairy entirely, or in general, because stop and think about it. What is cheese? It's up to 70% fat.
Yeah.
And it's the saturated fat. And
yeah, I hate to admit, you go to, Whole Foods and get those
block.
Those little, well, I get them cubed, I'm like, I like to pay more and they're cubed, and I could just sit there and just eat cube after cube. Like, it's an addiction. I mean, it feels that way, honestly, until I'm satisfied. So
let's go back to my case of Morphone detail there, because it is addictive. It absolutely is. Now, a couple of things I can say to that. As you alluded to earlier, how taste buds change. Taste buds change towards cheese too. And frankly, I no longer like cheese at all. In fact, my kids brought some pizza home. I think it was in September. And I ate a piece and thought, oh, there's something wrong with this pizza. And so I didn't eat any more. The kids seemed to like it. A month or so later, they brought another one home, and I ate another piece of that and went, no, it's not the pizza, it's me. It tastes like salted sour milk now.
Yeah. Yep.
That's interesting.
So, isn't it though?
So that exact thing happened on my end as well. So I always liked this one very specific pizza from a place next to the place I grew up next to. I went back to visit. Just traditionally, I went in to get a pie like I would, and I thought there was something wrong with it. I went back the next day, and then the third time, because I was there for 2 weeks. I'm like, I don't know, the chef might be out sick that week, or whoever's making the pizza screwing up. So I skipped it. And then right before I went home, I tried again, and it was way too salty every time. And so that's what I found as well, is that pizza now tastes entirely too salty for me to enjoy.
So it took you 3 times.
I really like that pizza. I really like
remember that when it comes to reproduction. Okay.
Oh boy.
So Gary, let me ask, and I want to hit on, if we will, after this, maybe we can get to some of the other basic tenets, because you've got several pillars that I think you addressed. Mm-hmm. But even on the diet perspective, which is so challenging for people. Yeah. So I know you're passionate, truly passionate, and I think about the practice of medicine and wellness. And I know you look to provide more relief behind just the symptom. You don't like to just treat symptoms. You like to actually get beyond that with a wellness plan. How much resistance do patients typically have when you're like, especially new ones that maybe don't know you and know everything stylistically about you? Yeah. What does that look like? What's that dance look like?
That's a very, very good question. And, you have to meet people where they live. I know that. And when I first started down this path, I blew my patients away. I did. And I got to go back to my teaching days. When I was teaching, I realized that I was really hired to teach about 80% of that class, right? 10% of that class was going to get it, whether there was a monkey standing up there, and 10% of it, frankly, was not going to get it. So it was my job to get that 80% and get them going, right? So for the first few years when I changed and started preaching all of this, I was giving everybody everything every time. Got us a little bit behind, and my nurses weren't terribly happy, but I was doing my mission,
Right.
And I was seeing all this success. I loved the success. I've got, in fact, a couple of patients come right to mind. One of them who's lost well over 200 pounds. One of them a female who's lost 160 pounds, and they're doing great. And I've got so many stories of people who have gotten rid of their diabetes and their hypertension. I've got all these stories, but you know what? They were coming out of that 10%. That 10%, they were going to do it. They just needed somebody to tell them, And when I realized that, That's when I came to the conclusion that I do need to meet people where they live. And how many people have already heard that they need to give up sugar, right? And so hearing it from me, they're okay with that. But when I take out that sacred cow, sorry about the pun, now they're fighting back. What do you mean I got to give up cheese? No, I can't do that. What do you mean I've got to give up meat? No, it's not going to happen. All right. Well, let's look at some. Try it again. Let's look at some statistics here. Even a small decrease in the amount of dairy has significant effects on longevity and morbidity and mortality, right? So let's meet them where they live and let's guide them in that direction. And this is going to sound a little bit familiar to you, Fred, but very often when my patients come in with a specific problem and I get some resistance when I say, hey, let's do this instead of throwing these medicines around, let's do this. I get some resistance, and what I tell them is, how about giving it a 2-week time frame? Try it for 2 weeks. See how you feel. If you're feeling better, maybe you'll want to continue this. I got an email not too long ago from a fellow that I did this exact thing with. He had chronic low back pain and he had dyslipidemia. That, by the way, is the second most common chronic disease. His cholesterol was not what it should be. He wanted to take the medicine that I had prescribed, but it caused him a lot of muscle aches. And with his backache already, he wasn't very comfortable with that medicine. And so I said, hey, here's an option. Why don't you try this instead? Give it 2 weeks, see how you feel, but let's see if this will make a difference in your cholesterol and you won't need the medicine. And he agreed to try it for 2 weeks. I got an email from him saying, I am never going off this diet. I didn't know what a pain-free life was like. That is the response I get from so many different people about, I put them on this interventional diet for a specific reason, and it comes out that it treats so many other things that we hadn't even talked about.
And there are a lot of other side effects with statins too, right? They're not the easy fix that they're often made to be.
Well, let's look at medicines in general. You know, when we're talking about a diet, we are talking about working with the body's physiology to accomplish what the body wants to accomplish. When we're talking about pills, for the most part, we're talking about going against the body's physiology to force it into a place it doesn't want to be. And bodies hit back. You know, they hit back. And so we have this struggle to get that drug out of our system. We have this struggle to sequester the drug. We have this struggle to basically take care of what the drug does on top of what we want it to do, right? All of these things are negative. And so while I am not at all against using medications, I still use them every day. You know, the fact is they need to be put in their proper place. A good lifestyle is the foundation. Medications sit on top of that. Mm-hmm. But what you hear over and over from my colleagues and what I have thought too, well, patients aren't going to change their diet, so I got to do this instead. Well, how effective is that? Well, look at that statin that this guy was on. For a low-risk population, guys who have no history of heart disease, no history of diabetes, but they have high cholesterol. If I put one of those guys on a statin, I'm lowering his cholesterol because I'm trying to prevent heart disease, right? I'm trying to prevent a heart attack. I have to put 104 people on that statin in order to prevent one heart attack. 104. Okay, well, what about the high-risk populations? Let's go to type 2 diabetes and coronary artery disease. And by the way, type 2 diabetes, the risk of a heart attack with type 2 diabetes is the same as a guy who has heart disease, has already had a heart attack, of having a second one. That's how strong the risk is for type 2 diabetes. 67% of diabetics will die of a heart attack.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So when you look at those kind of numbers, you say, we got to do something. We got to intervene. I am graded on the number of patients that I put on a statin in those circumstances. And I agree with that. I agree with that. I'm not arguing at all with that. Number needed to treat is something that you need to pay attention to. And in that situation, the number needed to treat, like that 104 with the other population, is 33. So it's a lot better. I save a heart attack. If I put 33 people on that drug, I save a heart attack. Okay. But if I put people on a better diet than they're on now, not even the diet you and I are talking about, but a diet better than what they're doing, I can save 36% or 36 out of 100 instead of the 3 out of 100 that I'm saving with the statin. And if I teach them to eat the way that you and I are going to be talking about, we're looking at saving 99.6 out of 100. Heart disease is basically 100% preventable, and it's curable by diet, not by pills. There's no pill on the planet that'll cure heart disease. We'll slow it down. We'll ameliorate the symptoms. We will not cure it. But a diet will. When you look at the number of diseases that a whole food plant-based diet will treat, you're looking at cancers, cardiovascular disease, multiple sclerosis, kidney stones, osteoporosis, type 2 diabetes. Some say type 1 diabetes too on a prevention side. Rheumatoid arthritis, obesity, erectile dysfunction, get your attention on that one. Macular degeneration, high blood pressure, acne, migraines, lupus, depression, Alzheimer's disease, cognitive dysfunction, which isn't Alzheimer's disease, and chronic pain. Now, when you look at that list, and I can back that up with study after study, you look at that list, find me a pill that'll do that.
So one thing I want to kind of interject, you mentioned plant-based diet. I do want to make the point that that there's many different types of meat, and I'm sure you'll be very familiar with this very famous example. Farm-raised salmon is essentially the worst type of fish you can eat. It's incredibly inflammatory, and I believe the OBGYN guidelines are now none is acceptable. They brought it down from like 6 ounces to 4 ounces to 2 ounces, and I was saying avoid it. But wild-caught salmon, because the omega-3 to 6 ratios are far more in line, is actually more healthy to eat. So are you of the school of thought that there's no form of healthy meat, or quality matters, for example, grass-fed and finished beef, and so on?
You know, the first definition we have to ask is, what does healthy mean, right? I mean, okay, guys, is a double stuffed Oreo cookie healthy?
No.
Well, compared to arsenic, you won't die if you stick it in your mouth, right? So, okay. When you look at from the definition of the word healthy, you realize it's a comparator word, right? Is something healthy? Well, compared to what? Now, for us in America, we have, on the one side, we have poison. On the other side, the absolute healthiest way that you can possibly eat is whole food plant-based, okay? Well, unfortunately, the standard American diet is over towards poison. It is not a healthy diet in comparison to all the things out there that we can eat. So when we ask, is wild-caught salmon healthy? It's healthier than the farm salmon, right? When you look at it from the perspective of, is meat healthy? It's healthier. This is a healthier meat than some others. But when you raised a good point as an aside as you were going through that. You mentioned the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio in the wild caught versus the farm caught. And remember, where does that omega-3 come from? It doesn't actually come from the fish. It comes from what the fish ate, right? And so when you look at it from there, you say, okay, what is the benefit of eating the salmon? It's the omega-3, right? Well, when you look at the studies that compare people who get omega-3 from fish and omega-3 from salmon, from vegetable sources, you find that the people that are taking the omega-3 from vegetable sources actually do better. And so you look at the wild-caught salmon and you say, well, what's the problem here? There's a couple. First off, it looks like some of the other components of the fish itself block our ability to get rid of the omega-6. And what's the big deal about the omega-3 anyway? The big deal about the omega-3 are these two medium chain fatty acids that they work down to, the EPA and the
DHA.
Thank you. Docosahexaenoic acid. That's a mouthful. Anyway, the DHA and the EPA are the ones, and some studies have shown that humans can't break the LA and the ALA. They cannot break it down to the EPA and the DHA. Boy, do I sound like a acronym guy or not?
Makes sense to me.
Well, turns out that when you get the omega-3 from the plant sources and you are not blocking it, and here's the thing, seed oils tend to block it because they're omega-6s in the seed oils, and the seed oils too. When you block them, you can actually break down significant amounts of the ALA down to the DHA and the EPA. So when you look at the omega-6 that comes in the fish, by the way, that ratio should be about 1-to-1. And in our diets today, it's like 20-to-1, omega-6 to omega-3. And that's bad for a lot of reasons. But when you get it from the fish, you still have a higher than 1-to-1 ratio, and you can't break that omega-3 down as well. So the real win with the salmon is the EPA and the DHA that you get out of the salmon itself. But when you go to the plant sources for it, the studies are actually better. So salmon is not that good for you.
It was more an example because the ratios are better. For example, grass-fed versus corn-fed, grass-fed, and such like that. I more wanted to make the point just from, I'm sure you've had the same experience when you tell people plant-based, they immediately start running out the room. Yeah. So I was more saying that even if someone's not considering plant-based and they're dead set on, continuing eating meats, there is such a difference in meat quality that it makes just a tremendous amount of actual difference.
You're right. When you look at what the differences are, that farm caught salmon, I cannot in good conscience ever recommend it to anybody. But why not? What are they getting in that
inflammation on plate?
Others? Yeah. And where's that inflammation coming from? It's coming from the runoff. It's coming from the antibiotics that they give the farm caught. And it's coming from the infections that are spreading like wildfire because those fish are just plain too close together. All of these make the farm caught much, much worse. But when you look at the other types of meat, what's wrong with grain-fed beef, right? Or corn-fed. That's what we advertise here in Indiana, our corn-fed beef. It's much better than the average. They're only talking about taste here. They're not talking about health, right? But meat in general, I don't recommend against it necessarily. What I tell people instead is let's limit the amount. And so if you can choose the healthier meats, let's choose them. Now, there are some meats that are just off the table. You mentioned the farm-caught salmon, and I'll stick with that one. But what about the processed meats?
Oh, yeah.
Processed meat is a class 1 carcinogen. What are we doing feeding it to our kids? I heard a statistic. I haven't actually backed this one up. The study nerd failed on this one. But I heard a statistic that I kind of believe. It's a hot dog's worth about 4 cigarettes. Why are we feeding that to our babies? Why are we putting it on our school lunches? Here in Indiana, by the way, it's a law. Without a doctor's excuse, we have to put a half pint of milk on every child's tray in the school lunches in this state. And that's something that I got to tackle one of these days. So anyway, to circle back on your question, what I tell people basically is have your meat and enjoy it, but limit the amount. Keep it to 3 ounces twice a week. And if you're going to limit it to 3 ounces twice a week, I don't care. Go have your steak. I don't care what meat you eat.
I'd also like to interject that the difference between grass and corn-fed cows is in nature. You don't see too many cows in cornfields chowing down.
Yeah,
they're not really built to eat it. Yeah,
and there's so much. And thank you for bringing me back. I kind of went down that rabbit trail, but there is so much wrong with the way that we do the corn-fed beef. There's so much wrong with the poor cows. So yeah, there's all kinds of things to be said for doing better with the meat that we do have too. What I'm kind of focusing on is that to me, in a certain respect, meat is meat, keep it to a minimum. And I think I do that focus almost reflexively to try and get people to understand how unimportant meat really is. We're proteinaholics in this country. We eat 10 times as much protein as we need, and we think we've got to have that protein from animal sources or it's not adequate. And so I'm really fighting against that preconceived notion when I go after the meats.
Well, I mean, it seems that there is a lot here to look at, but what would you suggest some of the first baby steps someone can take if they're like, okay, I'm ready to make a change. What do you do next?
Oh, the easiest change to make, throw out the dairy. That's the easiest change and the biggest bang for the buck. That list that I gave you of what dairy causes, You know, I didn't mention the flatulence, did I? But
what I was going to say is when Gary said the easiest thing to do was just cut out cheese, I said, I'm going to pull my earphones. I'm out, Jack. You take it the rest of the way, because this video cast is all downhill for me from this point on. That's the easiest thing to do, is eliminate cheese. So, did he answer your question, Jack? And I'm sorry, I want to make sure that he, as far as the baby steps, did we cover that? Okay.
Number one, dairy is the first baby.
Dairy, right? That's right. All right. So,
and
what I
easily behind that, and again, what are we doing? We are working with people rather than against them, right? As much as possible. So even easier than quitting dairy is to reaffirm their already realized presupposition that they need to get rid of the sugar.
Yeah.
You know, so I should have probably said that one first, but I almost assume that people know that.
You know what scares me about the sugar stats? It's whatever 70 pounds a year for the normal person. I don't eat any.
46.
Oh God, it's gone up. So I don't eat any. So someone's eating mine. You know what I mean? That's the weird thing when you think about that stat, since it's the median stat. There's so many people over that. That is terrifying.
You don't eat any sugar, Jack?
I know, I've avoided that. So when we met originally, I had just lost a bunch of weight. But yeah, no, I like to say I was only over 300 pounds once, but it's been over a decade, and yeah, there's been no sugar for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. So Gary, let me ask if I could. Mm-hmm. So I know there are multiple pillars, and I just wanted to get back to that. And we focused a lot on food. So I know there's exercise, I know there's sleep, and some other things. Can you address those components as well to your wellness practice?
I sure can. You know, and remember, one of the big components that when we were talking about diet was inflammation, right? And the chronic inflammation, we could do a deep dive. We could do a whole semester on inflammation and diet and what's going on there. But what are we doing about repair, right? When you look at inflammation is not a bad thing. I mean, every time you get a splinter, you get inflamed, right? Because you are beating back the diseases that are trying to enter your skin through that break. So inflammation in the right setting is exactly what it should be. It's when that inflammation fails us, that's when we get into trouble. The repair part of this fails us. But repair is a part of our body that works well and should be exercised. And when we do exercise, we break our bodies down, right? That's why none of us should ever do anything. Sit on the couch and wait. You know, who wants to break their body down, right? Again, what are we doing? We're repairing. And when you go out and work your body, you actually make it better because your body adjusts to what you just did. So that pain the next day isn't such a bad thing. Okay. So how much exercise should you get? Well, talk to anybody in the CrossFit community. 14 hours a day in a gym is about right, isn't it?
A little over the top for me at 62 and a half, but God bless the cross gym people.
Well, I mean, that's only because they spend all the rest of their time at the orthopedic office, like getting bolted back together.
Let's bring this out of the stratosphere. Let's bring this down to what makes the most difference. And when we look at the studies, 30 minutes of activity, 5 days a week, a total of 150 minutes of activity. You can also do that with the exact same results, 75 minutes twice a week. You can get the exact same results. And so that's the amount that I ask my patients to do. If you want to do more than that, you will get more benefit. But it's the old law of diminishing returns, right? 90% of the work gets done with 10% of the effort. The other 10% of the work, you need 90% of the effort, right? So the best bang for the buck is 30 minutes 5 times a week or 75 minutes twice a week. So when you look at it from that perspective, what types of exercise are the best? Well, you want a mix of them. Aerobic exercise is going to tune up your cardiovascular system the best. And so you want to get that heart rate up into a range 50 to 85% of your heart max. Do you guys know how to calculate your heart max? On 220 minus your age. So, Fred, for you, that'd be 3. I can pick on him. He's 2.5 years older than me, for crying out loud.
you better enjoy this guest appearance, Gary. This is the last time we're having you on this.
No, he's going to be back a lot. I'll start a new channel just to bring it
No, 220 minus your age. So your heart rate should be 157 to 158 should be your max. So 50 to 85% of that is where you want to exercise too, but 50% of that is only, in the 80s or in the high 70s. So you're going to want to get higher than that. If you exercised into the 120s, that would be about right. But you want to get that heart rate up and keep it up for a good 20 minutes. And that's going to tune your cardiovascular system up. But resistance exercise is absolutely great as well. Now, law of diminishing returns goes all the way past on resistance exercise. Weightlifters do not have notoriously long lifespans, especially the competition weightlifters. They tend to die in their 50s. We wonder why that is, and one of the big answers may be the amount of steroids that the guys at the top do, unfortunately. But yeah, so resistance exercise in its place, but you want to do that as well.
So you told me something interesting the other day, and it was about exercising with purpose.
Yes. In order to get there, we have to talk about the autonomic nervous system. And we'll get just a little bit complicated for a minute. We're going to talk two words, sympathetic and parasympathetic, okay? Sympathetic nervous system is what you tend to connect with the fight or flight reflex, the adrenaline, or what we call epinephrine, right? This is the part that we want in full swing in a competition. We want our adrenaline surging. We want our muscles reacting as best they possibly can. And so what does the sympathetic nervous system do? It dilates our eyes. It makes our heart race. It opens up our airways. It shunts blood flow from the internal organs out to the muscles so you're ready for maximal output. That sympathetic nervous system is why when you're 8 laps into a 10-lap course and you're already dying, you're going to push through it. You get an adrenaline rush, you push through it and get done. Or you've got 285 pounds on that bench and it's going up slowly, but you're going to get it done. These are not necessarily bad because they're short term. They're not long term. They're not necessarily bad. They do help us. And I'm never going to argue with going to a gym and exercising. It's great. Do it. Okay. But when you do exercise with a purpose, i.e. get out in your lawn and rake the grass, or, build that stone sculpture, or do something that's physically active, but also something satisfying to you, that actually gets all the same work done muscle-wise, cardiovascular-wise, but it activates the parasympathetic or the relaxation side of your nervous system, and that tends to actually be better for you. So yeah, working out in the yard is just as good as hitting the gym.
Would your wife not complaining for you to get out and rake the leaves and you do it, would that qualify as satisfying?
Depends on how much time you spend in the yard thinking nasty thoughts about your poor wife.
Okay. All right, got it.
Wipes out
offsets all the good stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
So when it comes to those two sides of the nervous system, they can be dysregulated. And how much would you say sleep quality and quantity plays into, let's say, parasympathetic overactivation?
And what are you trying to do here, young man? Are you trying to tell me that diet and exercise and sleep and all the things we mentioned earlier actually interrelate? Is that what you're trying to say?
Never. That would make too much sense.
Wouldn't it, though? How dare we be a unified whole, for crying out loud? Turns out you get less than 6 hours of sleep a night, you're actually messing with your ability to metabolize glucose. Did you know that? Yeah, you're actually putting yourself at risk for dysfunction on your metabolic side by not sleeping enough. You sleep less than 4 hours a night,
you're drunk.
Putting yourself at risk for a stroke. Yeah, not a good thing, right? So at least 7 hours of sleep. Shoot for 8 if you can.
Does that change with age at all, Gary, or no? Just curious.
A little bit. There's what you'll find is that teenagers need more sleep. They should be at 9 to 10, and then it should go down to about 8. And by the way, you shouldn't sleep more than 10. 10 hours plus actually increases your risk for stroke as well. But later on in life, we tend to need a little bit more sleep, and so getting into your 70s and 80s, yes, you're going to sleep more.
And so one of my favorite stats ever is if you consistently get under 4 hours of sleep, it's like you're actually intoxicated. Which is wild to me with how many people walk around just like zombies every day. You know what I mean?
I saw a study not too long ago that showed if you've been up for 24 hours, the impairment in your driving is about the same as blowing a .12. Yeah. And how many times have I been guilty about that? You know, I haven't had alcohol pass my lips since I was 20, but I have driven drunk by that definition more times than you want to know. You know, this is probably going to shock both of you, but it has sometimes there's a little bit of arrogance in my field. I know, shocking to both of you. But we do tend to feel that we are just too important to do things like sleep. You know, we got to keep going. Nobody else can do what we do. We got to do this. Yeah.
Gary, I want you to know in my 16 years in healthcare, I have not yet once met an arrogant physician. It just hasn't happened.
Pinocchio, your nose is about to touch your screen. So, it's, by the way, why we make horrible pilots. Physicians are the worst pilots. Did you know that?
Well, there seem to be a lot of plane crashes in the news, if you will, physicians with their planes. So I don't know what the statistics really are, but, you know.
I think there's one particular plane that physicians tend to like. I think it's called a dovetail doctor killer, if I'm remembering correctly, or a split-tail doctor killer or something like that, because, we think we're too important. The weather will get out of our way. So, but sleep. My colleagues and I have not slept enough because of that very thing. You know, how many times I've gone in to deliver that baby because nobody else could do it as well as I can. Oh, baloney. You know, so that's a very good point that you bring up. Our bodies were built to reset themselves at night. And that autonomic nervous system, when you do not sleep enough, you are running on adrenaline. How many times have you heard that? It's literally true. Mm-hmm. When you're running on adrenaline, that is not a good state to be in.
And then so I didn't want to step on you, Fred. So this is something that I've just known a lot of people who deal with. I live in the DC area, so it's a very high stress town, where sometimes I'll have known people who say that coffee doesn't do anything for me anymore. I need something stronger. And they're the same people that aren't sleeping, and they're doing all these energy drinks and coffee and smoking and nicotine, and that just nothing's working. So if people are in that sort of situation, would you say it's a pretty good sign that they need to start taking a look at things like their diet and sleep quality and so
100%. On? I mean, why isn't that caffeine working? Well, it's because they're keeping their receptors saturated 24/7. If they were to take the bull by the horns, go off of that caffeine for 3 days, take a little sip of something, it would hit them like a back hooves of a horse. You know, that's what caffeine is supposed to do, but it won't when you saturate those receptors 24/7. Back in the day, I did the same thing. You know, I used to go through a 12-pack of Diet Coke a day because I needed to, because I wasn't sleeping. Well, I could drink a Diet Coke and go straight to bed. Wasn't doing a thing for me. But I thought I needed it.
So what would your suggestion be to colleagues, if you will, that are interested in being open to a wellness approach outside of, medications and such, that either want to learn more? I mean, you seemingly had an epiphany and dove all in. But for those that just want to learn more, what do you recommend to them other than getting online or,
Well, the first thing we have to do is unlearn. There's so much in my field that is frankly not correct. The reliance that we have on our medications and our techniques. I mean, I love the fact that I have the pharmacology knowledge that was stuffed into my brain. I love the fact that we have the techniques and the technology that we do to make a difference in people's lives, but it's not the be all and end all, and it is certainly not the foundation. So what we have to do is unlearn. And what I would suggest is they start by building their library. A book called The China Study that was written in 1995 by T. Colin Campbell and his son Tom Campbell, who is also a physician. T. Colin Campbell is a nutritionist and one of the brightest men around. He basically started this revolution with that book. And I would tell my colleagues, start there. Get Dr. Michael Greger's book, How Not to Die. I think I mentioned that to you yesterday in our conversation, Fred.
You did.
Get that book. the reason why I think my colleagues would benefit from that book is because it is so science-based as well. And I use it as a textbook. I go from what he says straight to his studies, and then I can look those studies up myself. And it's fascinating, all the work that Michael Greger has done putting these studies out where all of us can see it. So if they really want to do a deep dive on this, start with those two books.
So being that this is the first time that the audience, much of the audience is getting to know you, we had a chance to talk a little bit about your passion for service work. And there's no way I was going to let you there's no way I was going to let you off the hook. As I mentioned, my wife is from Colombia, so I have some experience in international life and areas, if you will. But you have really had a life of service, and I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that.
Well, specifically Guatemala, I spend a lot of time in Guatemala, and the lessons that I have learned there, you simply can't learn here. I may catch flack for this statement, but I don't think many of us in the United States understand what poor really is. We have so much here, and we are so privileged with the society that we have. And you can be of any political or religious persuasion that you want to be, but you have certain things that you just accept as normal. For one, if you hear a funny noise in the middle of the night, you call 911, right? Well, that's not true around the world. And the lessons that we can learn by leaving these borders are very valuable lessons. The work that I've done in Guatemala, I'll tell the world, I have gained far more than I have given by going in and working with these people. One of the most important things to learn is that money and happiness do not have an equal sign between them. They just don't. And as I think I mentioned to you yesterday, I do not pass out Prozac when I go to Guatemala. We have a lesson that we have to learn here about how we worry about the things we have more than we worry about the things we don't. And since we have so much in this country, we worry about it. I mean, I mentioned I have 7 cars, or 7 kids. I don't even know how many cars I've had when I had all 7 there. We had way more cars than we had kids. And I'm worried about keeping them all running and making sure that they're up to date on everything. And I don't even know how many I have. And I'm worried about them, In Guatemala, where I go to in the mountains to run clinics for these folks, maybe the village will have a car. They don't worry about what they don't have. And that's one of the lessons that we can learn here in the States by cross-pollinating a little bit. I tell everybody, if you get a chance, go on a mission trip. You will learn far, far more than you can in the States. It resets your perspective, and that is what I gain when I go. Besides that, there are some amazing people outside these borders, absolutely amazing. So,
when you have a lot of stuff too, and this is not a unique concept. I heard this a long time ago, but when you have a lot of stuff, there's a whole fear factor in losing the stuff you have, right? Yeah. So it's almost like the more you fill yourself up with stuff, if you will, the more stressed you can be about losing it, paying for it, and sometimes a simplistic life, as you've probably seen and I've seen, is a healthier way. I know my wife is always very proud. Colombia is very traditionally voted, not infrequently, as the happiest country in the world. And I mentioned this to Gary the other day, Jack, that the first time I went to Colombia, and of course the country is like so many countries, there's class and there's people wealthy and middle class and impoverished. So it's no different. But one thing that I noticed, that the folks that didn't have, that were cleaning their doorsteps and their areas out front, they may have been poor in their purse or their wallet, but they weren't poor in their mind or their spirit. And unfortunately, in this country, when we talk poverty, so frequently it's mind and spirit, and it's not just lack of money. And that was the first time I had ever seen that just because people didn't have the amount of pride and self-esteem that they still had, and the care that they took was not, reflective of the fact they didn't have money, if you will.
stop and think about what makes us anxious in this country. I mean, here's a 100% rule. If you want an anxious and stress-filled life, chase money. Chase it. And you know how many millionaire colleagues I have that are anxious and angry and worried and stressed all the time because of the very fact you mentioned. They're worried about losing it, or they're worried about losing their access to it. It's like, you don't get that when you don't have it. And what I see of the folks there, they concentrate so much more on what's going on today than what's going to possibly happen tomorrow.
Yes.
And that,
Totally,
I think, is
Gary.
something we really can learn a lot from them in this country.
So one of my friends is a financial planner, and he always brings up this study that in America, happiness correlates with income up to $70,000.
Yeah.
And then after $70,000, it's diminishing returns. And then I believe after 135, there's almost no increase. So between like up to 70, there's a measurable increase. After 70, it quickly stops. And after, I think 135 or 150, there's no measurable increase, which is just mind blowing.
Yeah. Well, look at where happiness comes from. And the thing I've learned in my almost 60 years on this mud ball is if you want happiness, chase good relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That's
you can't
where
buy those.
really comes from.
Amen, brother.
Chase good relationships. One of the things that I am so blessed by is the fact that I get to take care of 15,000 friends and get paid to do it. That's what I'm so blessed by. And when I look at my schedule in the morning and I say, oh, look, I get to see them. Oh, good, I get to see him. Oh, good, I get to. That's why I can go to bed at night and put the head on the pillow and sleep. So, and that goes back to the sixth pillar, which is relationships, doesn't it? So.
Yeah, I think this has been great. I think we kind of covered everything we set out to cover on this first episode, but I also definitely think that we would want you back because there's a lot of great discussions that can be had. Yeah,
we could go down some serious rabbit trails, couldn't we?
Oh, absolutely. I'd be excited to wander on some of those with you. It's really, I can't thank you enough for doing this. There's a lot of people that what I've noticed in my personal life, and Fred sprung you on me. I didn't read your bio before we jumped down here, but in my personal life, that's one thing that I've kind of been I don't want to say like a crusader on, but when I see my friends, it's like everyone hits 30 and they start breaking, and it's just silly. You know what I mean? And then by the time they're 40, things have started to go like downhill that other people can see. So I'm just kind of the annoying guy. Like, why are you doing that? Why are you still eating Big Macs every day? Like, why? And the changes that you can see and you can make just by offering some simple advice are so worth it. I completely understand what you mean. And I think that more people really need to consider this, because it's not that people don't know it at a deep level, right? If you're going to go to a wedding in 3 months, a beach wedding, you don't go to 7-Eleven and get like the Slurpees and ice cream, right? Like everyone kind of knows what to avoid to generally be healthy. But I think, like you said right at the beginning, there needs to be some reason to start and then another reason to continue.
Well, I think you mentioned to me earlier that a lot of our target audience in this webinar is actually going to be the healthcare community.
Yes. And
one thing, with this position comes responsibility. We have a voice that sometimes nobody else has. How many times I've been in a situation where they listen to me not because of my knowledge or experience, but because of the initials before or after my name. And so with that comes the responsibility to tell them the right thing. And, I had a patient years ago who came to see me because a very good internist in this town here, when he asked the question, as a diabetic, what can I do to avoid a heart attack? His doctor told him, nothing, you're going to have one. So I understand where that guy was coming from. I mean, it is difficult in this field to watch people continue to go down the same path, regardless of the interventions that we've had to date, because our interventions don't work.
Yeah.
Insulin just disconnects the idiot light from telling you that the engine's overheating. That it doesn't give you a better outcome. It just gives me a better number on my sheet. So what do we do about that? Well, we watch them suffer. That's what we do. And I'm a little bit too hard on insulin. Let's face it, when we get the numbers down. We don't face the number of complications that a lot of diabetics face. So I shouldn't be too hard on insulin, but it's not changing the diet. It's not making the difference that a diet change can make. It's running counter to the way the body is supposed to work instead of running with it. So
I think that's a great place to end your first appearance on Behind the Curtain of Healthcare. And at the same time, I hope you'll join us again.
Oh, yeah, he
I'd
will.
be happy to.
Yeah, but I'm not talking to you for 2 weeks, Gary. I'm still pissed about the cheese. So
Look, Gary doesn't write the rules. He just tells you the rules.
You won't be near as flatulent.
Gary, thank you for coming on, and we will have you again if you'll join us again, because there's a lot you bring so much knowledge and passion and genuineness to what you do, and I think you can feel it. I think anyone watching this knows it. So hopefully we can have you on again soon and take this conversation to another level.